naturally leavened bread dough. Now that our dough has risen overnight, the lactobacilli have done their job and we are ready to roll it out into usable forms. When working with naturally leavened bread dough, water is your best friend. We're going to wet our counter, dump the dough out of the bowl and onto the counter, and then we're going to divide it before we roll it out. By following the recipe, you should have approximately 8 pounds of dough. Each loaf will be about 2 pounds. You can get a scale and weigh it if you'd like, or you can just eyeball it. We're going to do 2 loaves of bread, 1 pan of pita, which requires the same amount of dough, and then our last segment we're going to do a braided loaf, which requires half a pita loaf. We're going to set these aside for just a moment until we're ready to work with them. We're going to start with our loaf. We're going to wet our counter with water. We're going to wet our hands with water, and we're going to press this loaf out flat. This reinvigorates the lactobacilli. You do not want to knead the dough or break it, because you will break those gluten strands that hold this dough together and make this bread so nice. Okay, after we've flattened it out into a rectangle, we're going to fold it into thirds. And after each fold, we're going to press the air out. This method of shaping your loaf is unusual by normal standards, but it does make a beautiful loaf of naturally leavened bread. We're going to tuck the edges under, we're going to flatten it out, and we're going to set it in our pan. Once it's in the pan, go ahead and shape the loaf by rounding the edges. And smoothing the top. And there is a loaf of naturally leavened bread dough ready to rise before we bake it. Now that the loaves are formed and into the pans, we're going to cover them once again with a wet cloth while they rise. We're to the final step of our naturally leavened bread. We began by mixing the dough. You've seen that. We put it on our counter, let it leaven for 12 hours. We showed you what that looked like. We cut the bread and formed it into loaves and put it in our pans. And now it's been about 2.5 hours and it's ready to bake. We're going to bake the bread for 35 minutes at 450 degrees. We've preheated our oven. And we've placed a pan of water in the oven before we started. Our naturally leavened bread is done. Let's take these loaves out of the oven and show you how beautiful they've turned out. These loaves are beautiful, they're easy to make, they're highly nutritious, and most importantly, they are delicious. Our family loves them.